Detective Sarah Chen had seen her share of disturbing evidence in her 15 years on the force, but nothing prepared her for the unmarked VHS tape that arrived at the precinct that cold October morning. No return address, no explanation, just a yellowed envelope with "For the Police" scrawled in shaky handwriting that looked like it had been written by someone whose hands wouldn't stop trembling. The package had been sitting on her desk when she arrived, despite the fact that she'd locked her office the night before and security showed no one entering the building after hours. The janitor swore he hadn't seen it during his midnight rounds, and the front desk sergeant insisted no deliveries had come through during the night shift. Sarah examined the envelope under her desk lamp. The paper felt wrong. Too thin, almost translucent. And when she held it up to the light, she could swear she saw dark stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood. The handwriting itself seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at it. The tape contained what appeared to be 47 minutes of security camera footage from an abandoned warehouse. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m., October 13th, exactly 1 week ago. Sarah popped it into the old VHS player in the evidence room, expecting another crank video or amateur horror project from some film student trying to waste police time. What she saw made her blood run cold and would haunt her dreams for the rest of her very short life. The grainy black and white footage showed an empty warehouse floor, dust motes dancing in shafts of moonlight streaming through broken windows. The building looked familiar, though Sarah couldn't immediately place it. Something about the layout of the windows, the way the support beams cast shadows. It tugged at her memory like a half-forgotten nightmare. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened, just static silence and emptiness, broken only by the occasional creak of settling metal and the distant sound of wind whistling through gaps in the walls. Sarah was about to fast forward when she noticed something that made her lean closer to the screen, her coffee growing cold in her forgotten hands. In the far corner, barely visible in the poor lighting, a dark shape was moving. At first, she thought it might be a large rat or stray cat. Urban decay bred all kinds of vermin. But as the shape moved into better light, Sarah's stomach dropped like a stone into ice water. It was crawling, but crawling wrong. The movement was too fluid, too deliberate, like something that had never learned the proper way to walk upright and had developed its own horrific method of locomotion. Whatever it was moved like liquid shadow, creating angles that hurt to look at directly. When it paused to lift what might have been its head, Sarah could see that its spine curved in an S shape that would have killed any normal creature. It was human-sized, but moved on all fours, its pale limbs stretched and elongated like taffy. Where a face should have been, there was only smooth, milk-white skin stretched tight over what might have been bone, or might have been something far worse. Then, it began to sing. The sound that emerged from the creature sent ice through Sarah's veins and made her teeth ache. It was a child's lullaby, but sung in a voice that belonged to something ancient and fundamentally wrong. The melody was hauntingly familiar. Rockabye Baby, she realized with growing horror, but the words were different, spoken in a language that predated human civilization. As the creature sang, Sarah noticed that the timestamp on the footage had begun to flicker. Instead of progressing normally, it jumped backward and forward seemingly at random. 3:17, 3:15, 3:22, 3:11. The numbers themselves occasionally shifted into symbols she didn't recognize, geometric shapes that seemed to move when she wasn't looking at them directly. More shapes began to emerge from the shadows as the lullaby continued. They crawled from air vents, slithered from beneath piles of debris, materialized from corners where nothing had been moments before. Each new arrival was slightly different.
Some had too many limbs, others seemed to be missing pieces of themselves, leaving gaps where parts of their bodies should have been. Soon, dozens of the pale, faceless things filled the warehouse floor, all moving in perfect synchronization, all singing that terrible, beautiful lullaby in voices that harmonized in ways that made Sarah's ears ring. Their song created strange acoustics in the warehouse, echoing off walls and creating phantom melodies that seemed to come from nowhere. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the phone to call her captain, but something on screen stopped her cold. The creatures had begun to dance. They moved in a circle, their broken limbs creating grotesque ballet positions as they swayed to their own haunting melody. Their movements were hypnotic, almost beautiful in their alien precision. Each creature knew exactly where to step, when to turn, how to weave between its companions without collision. It was choreography that had been practiced for centuries, maybe millennia. In the center of their circle, the concrete floor began to crack. At first, just hairline fractures, but they spread quickly, forming intricate patterns that hurt to look at directly. The patterns weren't random, they formed symbols, sigils, geometric shapes that seemed to pulse with their own internal light, despite the black and white footage. From these cracks, something began to seep upward. It was darker than the shadows, a liquid blackness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The substance moved with purpose, flowing toward the center of the circle where the creatures continued their impossible dance. As it pooled on the warehouse floor, the singing grew louder, more urgent, more desperate. Sarah realized she was holding her breath, her lungs burning as she stared transfixed at the screen. The timestamp showed 3:33 a.m., and she noticed with growing dread that her office clock showed the same time. But that was impossible. It had been early morning when she started watching, and she couldn't have been staring at the screen for that long. The black substance began to take shape, rising from the floor like smoke made solid. It formed a towering figure, perhaps 8 feet tall, with arms that reached nearly to the ground and ended in what looked like clusters of thin, writhing fingers. Its body was impossibly thin, as if someone had stretched a human form on a rack until it barely held together. Its face was a void, an absence of everything that made a face human. When it opened what might have been its mouth, the sound that emerged made the old TV speakers crackle and pop, sending feedback screeching through the evidence room. It spoke in a voice like grinding stone, like the sound of tombstones scraping against each other in an earthquake. "The Watchers have found you." The camera began to shake violently, as if something was hitting the security system with tremendous force. The image fractured and reformed, showing impossible angles of the warehouse. Views from cameras that couldn't exist, perspectives that violated the basic laws of physics. Through it all, Sarah could see the pale creatures turning toward the camera, their eyeless faces somehow focused directly on her through the screen. She tried to look away, but found that her muscles wouldn't obey. Her eyes were locked on the screen, as if invisible hands were forcing her head in position. Tears streamed down her face from the strain of not blinking, but she couldn't close her eyelids no matter how hard she tried. The tall figure raised one impossible arm and pointed directly at the camera with one of its writhing finger clusters. "She sees us now," it said, and Sarah could swear she felt those words vibrate in her chest cavity. "She is chosen. The cycle begins again." Sarah's office door slammed shut behind her with a bang that rattled the frosted glass windows. She tried to spin around, but her body still wouldn't respond to her commands. Through her peripheral vision, she could see that the hallway beyond the frosted glass was no longer empty. Tall, thin shadows moved back and forth, their shapes distorted by the textured glass, but unmistakably wrong. Something large and wrong crawling through the ductwork overhead. Sarah finally managed to move, grabbing her service weapon with hands that shook so badly she nearly dropped it twice. She backed toward the door, but the handle wouldn't turn no matter how hard she twisted it. The metal was ice cold against her palm, and she could swear she felt it pulse like a heartbeat. Through the frosted glass, she could see shapes moving in the hallway. Too tall, too thin, flowing like liquid in the fluorescent light. Their shadows danced across the glass in patterns that made her eyes water and her head pound. Whatever was out there, there were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all moving with that same synchronized purpose she'd seen in the warehouse. She turned back to the TV screen, and there they were, dozens of the creatures filling her office, though when she looked around the room with her own eyes, she saw nothing. Only on the screen did they appear, reaching toward her with their impossibly long arms, their faceless heads tilted in what might have been curiosity or hunger. The tall figure materialized in the corner of the room, not on the screen this time, but actually there, its void face somehow smiling without features. Up close, she could see that its skin wasn't skin at all, but something that looked like wet plastic stretched over a framework of bent wire and broken bones. "The Watcher becomes the watched," it whispered, and Sarah could smell something like ozone and decay mixed with the coppery scent of old blood. "You have seen too much. Now you must join us. The dance requires new partners." Sarah tried to scream, but no sound came. Her vocal cords felt frozen, paralyzed by a terror so complete it had shut down her basic biological functions. The world began to fade around the edges, turning into the same grainy black and white as the security footage. She felt her limbs growing heavy, her spine beginning to curve as gravity pulled her toward the floor in ways that violated everything she knew about physics. Her bones began to bend, creating new joints where none had existed before. The pain was indescribable, like being turned inside out while simultaneously being crushed and stretched. She could feel her face smoothing over, her features disappearing as if they were being erased by an invisible hand.
The last thing she remembered before the darkness took her completely was the sound of children singing, and the horrible realization that she recognized her own voice among them. Not her current voice, but the voice she'd had as a child, singing that same lullaby her mother had sung to her 30 years ago. The next morning, Detective Sarah Chen was reported missing. Her office was found locked from the inside, empty except for a VHS tape still playing on repeat and the lingering smell of ozone and decay. The footage showed an empty warehouse, peaceful and silent, with only a timestamp that shouldn't exist. 3:33 a.m. Forever. Her service weapon was found on the floor, unfired, but there were strange scratches in the metal that looked almost like fingerprints, if fingers could be twice as long as human fingers and end in points sharp enough to score steel. But sometimes, late at night, other officers swear they can hear singing coming from the evidence room, and in the corners of their vision, they glimpse pale shapes that disappear when they turn to look directly at them. The janitor quit after finding Sarah's nameplate in the air vent above her office, even though maintenance swears no one could have gotten it up there. The tape is still there, still playing, still waiting for the next watcher to see what they shouldn't see.
Internal Affairs has tried to dispose of it 3 times, but it always reappears on someone's desk by morning, usually with a new envelope bearing the same shaky handwriting. Some cases, the captain tells new recruits while avoiding their eyes, are better left unsolved, and some evidence is better left unwatched. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and there's always another detective willing to pop that tape into the player just to see what all the fuss is about. The cycle continues. The dance never ends. And in warehouse cameras across the city, pale figures wait patiently for their next partner to join the eternal waltz.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now, before the next nightmare finds you.